Suddenly a loud bird-like scream echoed off the mountain, piercing the dark blue air. "Get out of sight," Kirito yelled, pointing to a big crystal nearby. I quickly ran towards it, and hid behind him. As we took cover, I remembered something important. The dragon's attacks go like this. It swipes its claws from both sides, then breathes ice. And finally blows a strong gust of wind. "Be careful," I added, trying to warn Kirito just in time. Kirito still had his back to me, but I saw him throw up his left fist with his thumb sticking out. At the same time, the air in front of him started to wobble and shake. Suddenly a huge shape began to take form. Like it was oozing out of thin air, blocks of pixels popped into view one by one, slowly turning into a giant creature. As the pieces connected, the creature became clearer and more detailed. Then it let out an earth-shaking roar that made everything rattle. Whoa! Tiny pieces went flying everywhere. They sparkled and then vanished into thin air. But my eyes were fixed on the amazing white dragon. Its scales looked like they were made of ice and shone so brightly. The dragon flapped its huge wings, rising up into the air with ease. It was incredible, both beautiful and a little scary at the same time. Those big red eyes stared down at us, gleaming like rubies. Then Kirito did something really cool. He calmly reached back and pulled out his super cool black sword, the sound of it echoing through the air. It was like the dragon was waiting for a signal to start fighting. Suddenly it opened its huge mouth and let out a blast of white icy air. The sound was like a loud roar. "Look out, it's breathing ice," I yelled to Kirito. But he didn't budge. He stood tall, holding his sword straight up in the air. I thought to myself, no way can he stop that icy blast with such a small sword. But then something cool happened. Kirito's sword started spinning super fast, like a windmill in his hand. A weird light green glow surrounded Kirito's sword. I was pretty sure that meant he was using a special skill. The sword was moving so fast it was like a spinning shield of light. Just then, a blast of icy air shot straight at the sword. There was a bright flash of white, and I had to look away. But when I opened my eyes again, I saw that the freezing air had just bounced right off Kirito's shield. It was like the ice breath had hit an invisible wall, and just disappeared. I quickly glanced over at Kirito to check how much health he had left. Something weird was happening. The corner of his health bar was dropping as the ice breath hit him, but then it would quickly refill. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was like he had a superpower. This was thanks to something called battle healing, an extremely rare and powerful skill. The crazy thing about battle healing is that you can only get better at it by taking a lot of damage in battles. That means you have to put yourself in harm's way to make it stronger. It's super risky. So who was this guy? Anyway, I found myself wondering that for the millionth time. How did he manage to master such an insane skill? This guy was seriously powerful. It was super obvious, but here's the weird thing. His name wasn't listed in any of the top guilds, like the famous Knights of the Blood. Just as the dragon's breath attack started to fade away, Kirito sprang into action again. He jumped at the flying dragon, creating a huge explosion of snow as he launched himself into the air. Normally, when fighting flying enemies, players use long poles or throwing weapons to knock them to the ground, where they can be attacked up close, but Kirito was about to do something totally different. Get ready for an epic move. Kirito jumped super high, almost as high as the dragon's head. While he was still in midair, he started punching the dragon with one hand in a crazy fast combo. His sword made high-pitched zing sounds as he spun around the dragon at lightning speed. The dragon tried to swat him away with its sharp claws, but Kirito was too fast. By the time he landed back on the ground, the dragon had already lost a huge chunk of its health, 30% gone. It was an amazing and totally overwhelming attack. I got chills just thinking about what I was seeing. The dragon blasted Kirito with ice breath again, but he dodged to the side and jumped back into action. This time, instead of using his speedy combo moves, Kirito started smashing the dragon with powerful single blows. Each hit took a big chunk out of the dragon's health bar. The dragon was getting weaker fast. Its HP bar was turning red, which meant it was almost defeated. The battle was almost over. Just one or two more hits would do it. I stood up, ready to give Kirito the credit he deserved. As I stepped out from behind the crystal pillar, Kirito suddenly yelled at me. It was like he had eyes in the back of his head. "No, you idiot. "Stay hidden," he shouted. I was confused. "Why not?" I asked him. "It's all over, just finish it already." But then, out of nowhere, a dragon appeared above us. It flapped its massive wings, creating a deafening clap that sent snow swirling everywhere. The ground beneath the beast erupted in a huge cloud of white powder. I stood there frozen in shock. Meanwhile, Kirito was just a few feet away, stabbing his sword into the ground. He tried to say something, but I couldn't hear him over the sound of my own heartbeat. What was going on? Suddenly, he vanished into the stormy mess. A powerful gust of wind swept me up and sent me flying. Whoa, a gale attack was coming right at me. I had just talked about this kind of move, but now it was happening to me. As I spun around in midair, I remembered what I had said just a minute ago. Luckily, the attack wasn't super strong, so I didn't get hurt too badly. I stretched out my arms to balance myself as I came in for a landing. But when the snow swirled away, I was in for a shock. There was no ground underneath me. I had stumbled right over the edge of a huge hole at the top of the mountain. My brain went blank and my body froze up. "No way," I muttered as I fell through the air, reaching out desperately. Just when all hope seemed lost, a black leather glove clamped down on my fingers, catching me in midair. I slowly opened my eyes, still dazed and blurry. Then I saw him, Kirito. He had rushed away from the battle with the dragon and sprinted back to save me, grabbing my hand just in time. I felt a strong pull as he yanked me against his chest. His other arm wrapped around my back, pulling me in even closer. "Hold on," he yelled right into my ear. I grabbed him tightly with both arms, wrapping them around his body. And then we started to drop. Together we plummeted down into the huge hole, clinging to each other for dear life. The wind was howling in my ears like a wild animal. The coat I was wearing flapped around me like crazy. We were staring down into this massive hole, and I couldn't help but think about how deep it went. If it went all the way down to the bottom of Aincrad's floor, we'd be doomed. But for some reason that thought didn't really scare me. I just felt numb. My eyes were fixed on the tiny circle of light above us, watching as it got smaller and smaller. Then, out of nowhere, Kirito moved his right hand. He was still gripping his sword tightly. "Get ready for a wild ride." Kirito pulled back his arm, and then thrust it forward with all his might. Suddenly, a bright light flashed around us with a loud gashunk sound. He was trying to change our direction, in midair, by using a powerful attack, aiming us straight at the pit wall. The icy blue surface was getting closer and closer. I clenched my teeth thinking, this is it. But just before we slammed into the wall, Kirito swung his sword again. With one last burst of strength, he jabbed the blade deep into the ice. Whoa, what a crash! When we smashed into the ice wall, sparks flew everywhere. It was like striking a match on a rock. Our fall wasn't over yet, but at least we slowed down a bit. Kirito's sword was still scraping against the ice, making a super loud screeching sound, kind of like when you scratch a sharp object across a metal sheet. I tilted my head down to see where we were headed. And oh no, the bottom of the pit was getting closer. It was piled high with snow, but it didn't look soft enough to break our fall. It was coming straight for us, only seconds to spare. I clamped my mouth shut to keep from yelling and grabbed onto him tight. He dropped his sword and wrapped me in a bear hug, spinning around so his back would take the hit. Then, bam! The impact was intense. We crashed into the snow, sending it flying up into the air. As we lay there, the snowflakes gently fell back down, melting against my cheek. Suddenly, the chill snapped me back to reality. I opened my eyes to find Kirito staring back at me. His dark eyes were right in front of mine. He forced a weak smile, and his cheek twitched with pain. He still had a tight grip on me. "We made it," he whispered. I nodded slowly, trying to process everything. "Yeah, we made it." We just lay there for what felt like forever, not saying a word. Time seemed to stand still. It could have been seconds or minutes. I had no idea. I didn't want to budge. His warm body was making my head all fuzzy. But slowly he let go of me and sat up. He put his sword away and then pulled out 2 small bottles from a pouch on his belt. He handed one to me and said, "Just in case, you should drink this." I grunted, still feeling a bit dazed, and sat up too. I took the bottle from him, curious about what was inside. I was still okay with plenty of health left. But Kirito wasn't so lucky. He had taken a big hit from our fall and was really hurt now. His health was running low. I quickly grabbed a special drink that would help him feel better. It tasted sweet and sour at the same time. But I knew it would work fast. I downed it in one gulp, then turned to Kirito. I wanted to say something to him, but the right words didn't come easily. Thanks, I stuttered, trying to express my gratitude. I grinned at my friend. Thanks for saving me. He just gave me his usual sarcastic smile. It's a bit too soon to be thanking me, he said. I looked up at the sky. Okay, fine. At least we escaped that dragon. But now how are we going to get out of this pit? My friend shrugged. Easy, we'll just teleport out of here. I started digging through my apron pockets, and pulled out a small blue crystal. Tere, I said, holding it up for him to see. I don't think this will work, my friend said, shaking his head. This place is designed to trap us. They're not just gonna let us escape that easily. I gave him a stubborn look and held up the crystal. I'm gonna try anyway, I said. Then I spoke the magic words. Teleport, Lindarth. My voice bounced off the cold, icy walls, but it sounded kind of weak. The crystal just sparkled quietly, like it was waiting to see what would happen next. Kirito just shrugged and looked hopeless. Honestly, if I thought the crystal would work, I would have tried it when we were falling, he said. I had a feeling this place might be blocking its power. I looked down feeling pretty disappointed. Then I felt Kirito's hand drop onto my head. He started messing up my hair, rubbing it all over the place. Hey, don't get too down, he said, trying to cheer me up. Maybe the crystal not working is a sign that there's another way out, I said, but my friend wasn't so sure. You don't know that, he argued. It could be a trap meant to kill us when we fall. We're lucky to be alive. I had to admit, he had a point. I threw up my hands in frustration. Aren't you gonna try to make me feel better? I asked, getting a little angry, but instead of sympathizing with me, he just grinned at my outburst. Liz, you look even better when you're mad, he said with a grin. I was taken aback. What's your problem? I exclaimed. He pulled his hand away from my head and stood up, while I froze, feeling angry and embarrassed. But then he asked, so, what do you want to do first? In this super casual tone, like we were just hanging out on a normal day or something. I was shocked, but at the same time it was kind of funny. I couldn't help but laugh, which actually made me feel a little better. I gave my cheeks a few quick slaps to snap myself out of it, and stood up. As I looked around, I saw that we were standing on a flat floor, made of ice, covered in a thin layer of snow. It was the bottom of the hole we were trapped in. Imagine standing in a huge hole. That's about 10 meters across, roughly the same width from top to bottom. A tiny bit of light was managing to sneak in from way up high, bouncing off the icy walls as it made its way down. But this light wasn't going to last long. In just a few minutes, the whole place would be completely dark. As you looked around, you couldn't find any doors, tunnels or passages on the walls or floor that might lead you out of this frozen pit. I threw my hands up on my hips and shook my head, trying to think of something, anything. The first idea that came to mind tumbled out of my mouth. Hey, why don't we just call for help? But Kirito wasn't impressed. Wait a minute, he said. Isn't this place considered a dungeon? And that was a problem. You see, in the game you can send private messages to your friends, like I could message Asuna if I needed to. But there's a catch. Those messages don't work when you're stuck in a dungeon. We had another problem, no way to track where we were. I tried to check my messages, but just like Kirito thought, it wasn't working. Hey, what if we shout for other players who are hunting the dragon? I asked. But then I looked down and realized we were super high up, at 250 feet. Our voices would never carry that far. Kirito just shrugged. Your turn, genius, he said with a grin. What's your next big idea? I was getting frustrated because none of my suggestions were working out. You won't believe what Kirito said next. We'll run up the wall, he exclaimed. I thought he was crazy. Are you kidding me? I asked. But Kirito just shrugged and said, we won't know if it's possible until we try. I stood there in shock as Kirito charged towards the wall at full speed. The snow swirled around his feet, and the wind from his sprint hit me right in the face. Just when I thought he was going to crash into the wall, Kirito suddenly crouched down low. Then, in a burst of energy, he sprang upward. I couldn't believe my eyes. Kirito was running on the wall, like he defied gravity or something. He had his legs pressed against the wall high above me, and was moving forward with his body tilted at a crazy angle. I stood there frozen, my mouth hanging open in shock. Kirito was running around the walls of the hole in a spiral pattern, like a ninja from a crazy action movie. He kept going higher and higher, getting smaller and smaller, until, whoops, he lost his footing about a third of the way up. "Olao, hussars!" he yelled as he fell towards me. His arms were flailing wildly, but it wasn't like it was gonna help him. I jumped out of the way just in time, and Kirito crashed into the snow, where I had been standing. It was like he made a human-shaped hole in the ground. Exactly 1 minute later, Kirito was sitting against the wall, looking pretty beat up. He had a second potion stuck in his mouth, trying to recover from his wild fall. I was still trying to process what I just saw. It was totally insane. I let out a frustrated sigh. "You know, I never thought you were the sharpest sword in the rack," I said, shaking my head. "But this is something else." Kirito just shrugged and said, "I would made it, if I had more room to run up." I raised an eyebrow. "No way. That's not gonna cut it," I muttered under my breath. Kirito didn't seem to care. He just tucked his empty bottle away, and stretched his arms over his head. "Anyway, it's getting too dark to try anything else now. We'll have to set up camp for the night." Finally, some good news. "It doesn't look like any creepy monsters are gonna jump out at us here," someone said. The sun had set a while ago, and now the bottom of the hole was almost completely dark. "That's true," another voice agreed. Kirito nodded and then opened his menu. He started pulling out items, one by one, getting ready for whatever came next. Imagine being on an adventure with a friend who's totally prepared for anything. Kirito pulled out some cool gear, a big camping lantern, a pot for cooking, and a few mysterious bags. He also had 2 mugs, which made me wonder what we'd be drinking. I raised an eyebrow and asked, "Do you always carry all this stuff with you?" Kirito's response was totally serious. "I spend the night in dungeons all the time," he said. I couldn't believe it, he wasn't even joking. Kirito flipped a switch and the lantern sprang to life with a soft poof sound. The bright orange light lit up everything around us. Then he put the pot on top of the lantern, and started scooping up snow. He tossed the snow into the pot, and I had no idea what he was planning to make. But one thing was for sure, Kirito was ready for whatever lay ahead. The moment of truth. He ripped open the small bags and poured their contents into the pot. Then, he slapped on a lid and clicked it shut twice. Instantly, a cooking timer popped up in front of us. The aroma of delicious herbs wafted through the air, making my nose twitch. My stomach had been quiet all day. I'd only had a few bites of hot dog earlier, but now it was like my belly was saying, "Hey, I'm starving." It started to growl and rumble, demanding some food. Just then the timer went ding, and vanished into thin air. Kirito picked up the pot and filled our 2 mugs. "Don't expect too much," he warned with a grin. "I'm really bad at cooking." I took my mug from him and felt the warmth spread through my hands. The soup inside was pretty basic, just some herbs and dried meat, but somehow it tasted amazing. Kirito must have used some seriously good ingredients to make it turn out so delicious. As I slurped my hot soup, I could feel it warming me up from the inside out. It was a weird feeling, like I was dreaming or something. "This is all so strange," I said, talking to my soup more than the person across from me. "I'm in a new place with someone I just met, and we're just hanging out and eating soup together." The other person, who seemed to know what they were doing, chimed in. "Hey, you're a crafter, Liz. When you explore dungeons like we do, you often end up teaming up with people you meet on the road." "It's not weird, it's just how it goes." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Really? Okay, so what's the deal with dungeons?" he asked. The guy stumbled over his words. Well, I don't really have any cool stories to share." He paused and looked around, then suddenly remembered something. "Oh wait, before I forget." He quickly cleaned up the empty cups and pot, shoving them back into a special menu container. Then he started digging around some more. This time he pulled out 2 huge bundles of cloth. They looked like super-sized sleeping bags. "Check these out," he said with a smile. "These are top-notch camping bedrolls. They're way bigger and better than the ones you'd use in real life." "Check this out," Kirito said with a grin, tossing me a weird-looking blanket thingy. It landed on the snow with a soft thud. I picked it up and was surprised by how big it was. I could fit inside it 3 times over. "This is crazy," I said, shaking my head. You carry around all this stuff, and not just one of these blankets but two. Kirito just chuckled and started taking off his gear. You've got to make the most of what you've got, he said before diving into the left side of his bedroll. By the way, he told me that this blanket thingy was special. It keeps the cold out and hides us from any monsters that might be lurking around. I did what he said and took off my coat and mace. Then slipped into the bag. It fit like a glove. He wasn't kidding when he said it was warm inside. It really was cozy. And it was way softer than it looked from the outside. We were sitting facing each other, with just a few feet between us, and the lantern was right in the middle. Suddenly, I felt a little shy, which was weird. I finally spoke up to break the awkward silence. Hey, tell me a story, I said. Kirito looked up and hesitated for a moment. Okay. He folded his arms behind his head and started talking. He told me about this crazy thing that happened to him. Apparently he fell into a trap called an MPK. It's when someone lures super strong monsters into a fight with other players, just to kill them off. He also shared this epic tale about fighting a boss monster. The weird thing was, the monster didn't attack very often, but it had a ton of defense. That meant Kirito and his friends had to take turns sleeping while the others kept the monster busy. Can you believe it took them 2 whole days to win that battle? Imagine being part of a group of 100 brave fighters who had to roll dice to decide who got the coolest loot. It was just one of many epic stories about Kirito's adventures in the game. These tales were full of action and humor, and they all added up to one amazing truth. Kirito was one of the best players out there, a true gaming superstar. But being a superstar comes with huge responsibility. Thousands of players were counting on him to make the right moves and stay alive. It's a lot of pressure. So why was he putting his life on the line to help someone like me? It didn't seem fair. He had too much at stake to be worrying about my safety. I turned to look at the guy next to me. The lantern light made his dark eyes sparkle as he stared back. Hey Kirito, can I ask you something? I said. He raised an eyebrow and replied. You're being super polite all of a sudden. What's going on? I took a deep breath and asked. Why did you save me? We could have both died from that fall. It was a really big risk. Why? I asked, looking at him curiously. His face tensed up for a second, but then he relaxed again. If I had to watch you die, I'd rather die with you, he said quietly. Especially if it was someone like you, Liz. I rolled my eyes. You're crazy. Nobody thinks like that. But even though I tried to sound tough, I could feel tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. My heart did a weird flip inside my chest, and I struggled to chill out. It was like a dam had burst. Someone was finally being real with me. Since I'd arrived in this new world, nobody had spoken to me with such kindness and honesty. To be honest, I don't think anyone had ever been that nice to me. Back in the real world either. All of a sudden, I felt a huge wave of emotions rising up inside me. It was like all the loneliness and longing for human connection that had been building up over months was about to overwhelm me. I really wanted to feel Kirito's warmth for myself, to sense it deep in my heart. Before I knew what was happening, I blurted out a request. Hold my hand. I leaned to the left, and stretched my arm out of the bedroll, reaching towards him. Kirito looked at me with his dark eyes for a moment, then nodded silently, and did the same.